Hopefully everybody enjoyed sleeping in this morning, starting here at 8 o'clock instead of the usual time. Appreciate you being here. We have some very animated bills that we're going to discuss today. We're going to try and push forward. That we're getting to the point where we've only got a couple more of these meetings before crossover. So we've got a number of bills we want to try and get out as quickly as possible. So with that, Mark, would you please call the roll?
Representative Campbell.
Excused.
Representative Knapp.
Here.
Representative Larson.
Here.
Representative Lawley.
Here.
Representative Riggins.
Excused.
Representative Schmidt.
Here.
Representative Tarver.
Here.
Representative Weber.
Present.
Chairman Heiner.
Present. Thank you, committee. The first bill on our docket is House Bill 209, Reliable and Dispatchable Low Carbon Standards. I don't see anyone out there to present it. Maybe we can have Representative Knapp do that for us. This is Representative Knapp's personal bill. Please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Good morning to everybody. Happy Repeal Day. My name is Representative Christopher Knapp from Campbell County. I'm here to present to you House Bill 209, Reliable and Dispatchable Low Carbon Standards Repeal. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would ask for indulgence in explaining what the repealer does.
Proceed, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So what does the repealer do? It basically takes away what was codification of EPA regulations and rules. It also takes away the mandate for our coal-fired power plants to look at a way to basically operate off of those rules and to free them from the onerous either having a plan or going forward with a project for CO2 sequestration at a coal-fired plant. We heard from testimony over the interim and in the past that this bill would require them to have a project or have a plan why they wouldn't have a project. And those tend to cost tens of millions of dollars, even for the pilot project. So typically they would get grants, get credits from the government, national government, to go forward with a plan. Now, that's just to see if something works. If it did work and they had to go forward with building a commercial plant for sequestration, we've heard testimony that that would cost up to $500 million to $1 billion for every coal-fired plant. So this repeal frees up our coal-fired plants, our fossil fuel energy, to let the market dictate what energy will do. Government for too long has had a thumb on the market, both nationally and with HB 200 and the subsequent Senate file. Locally, I would say that the state has been capitulant in that regard. So this does away with that. It levels the playing field. The entire green movement was not about choices. It was about regulating and restricting one source of energy while subsidizing and crediting another. That is not market choices. That is called government manipulation. Our power companies had no choice. It was either comply or perish. This would allow for continued exploration of technology on a voluntary basis. The PRC, for rate cases, the PRC already has the capability of factoring in certain costs for those rate cases. Grant matching funds, we've contributed some grants to companies thus far in certain technologies. This would not limit the government or the governor's ability to continue to do that. There's new technologies out there. There's the ITC in Gillette. And this would not limit the ability to still supply those grants. The Appropriations Committee may limit that, but this would not. I wanted to touch a little bit on EOR because carbon sequestration is a very important piece to our oil and gas sector. This repeal would not affect that at all as well. I believe it actually enhances it because it diverges the mandated COR or the mandated carbon sequestration at a power plant versus the benefit of CO2 in working in our fields to increase our oil production. So that technology has been going on for 40 years. The supply is good. Pipelines are needed. But the Trump administration is willing to promote deregulating, and Wyoming can incentivize through tax relief as well to continue down that EOR road and benefit our oil industry. That can also be a separate interim topic if companies see that that's a good process, and if we're willing to put in the effort to promote pipeline expansion, that I think is a future topic. Our Wyoming energy policy today in leadership has been one of transition, I would say. We've basically said the world is moving in a certain direction, the market is moving in a certain direction, and so we need to transition and lessen that effect on Wyoming. In other words, play out the fossil fuel power plants, let them have a soft landing, so to speak. I believe that our energy policy should level the playing field with the energy industry, get government out of the energy market, let the energy market play out as it should as to what is the cheapest, most dispatchable, affordable level of energy. Everything that we do, including these mandates, increases that cost of energy. So when you look at our rate increases over the last 3 years, it all has to do with buying spot prices on the market, energy market. It has to do with infrastructure for wind and solar. And finally, it's going to have to do with this carbon sequestration plan and these mandates, because those costs are going to end up at the consumer's lap. And so it'll continue to create a rise in the rate structure. And I think that this is a good time with the change of administration to stop this process. We need to follow the laws written by Congress, not agencies. And with this favorable administration, we must lay the groundwork for the next energy plays and be proactive instead of reactive. It's great to give speeches about litigating what's already been done to us. It's another to lead and let others react. I believe that this is an opportunity to shore up what the administration will do. The administration has already said a moratorium on grants for clean energy projects. They have taken us out of the Paris Climate Accords and put a moratorium on wind projects as well. So I think Wyoming has a unique opportunity to take what has been placed before us in battle, to shore up our positions, to make it much harder to unravel, and to lead Wyoming and unleash the power of our resources. Thank you. With that, I'll take questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Knapp. Chairman Knapp, appreciate your testimony. Any questions for Chairman Knapp? Vice Chair Tarver, please.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Chris, could you explain the Chevron doctrine a little bit and how this bill might, I don't know, work with that?
Representative Knapp?
Yes, Mr. Vice Chairman, Mr. Chairman, thank you. The Chevron doctrine is an important piece to where Wyoming stands as far as the EPA. The EPA has lost several Supreme Court cases. And if you think about it, they've tried to inch industry into a direction. So in other words, the EPA will come up with rules. Those rules will be litigated. They'll move up through the Supreme Court, takes time. Once the Supreme Court rules against them, immediately they come out with another 75 rules. So we've been through this several times with the EPA. And I always wondered, well, isn't there some way that the Supreme Court can limit that same cycle going over and over again? And they did. So what the Supreme Court did with their last ruling was they made it to where they reversed the Chevron doctrine. And the Chevron doctrine basically allowed for agencies to interpret ambiguous law from Congress. And if you think about it, the only laws that exist constitutionally are from Congress, not from agencies. So agencies had used this doctrine to basically impose their will or impose what they see as law onto the industry. This ruling basically took that back to the courts and said any ambiguous language from Congress or in Congress's law could be interpreted by the courts. And so that's what's been done. So that was a very important doctrine, and it was a signal to Wyoming to say, we live by Congress's law. We do not live by unconstitutional mandates or rules from agencies. And so I think, again, this is a good opportunity for Wyoming to dictate where we go for energy. And if there's any litigation in the future from the EPA, it will be the EPA suing us because we went a direction rather than the other way around. It stops the cycle.
Thank you. Representative Lawley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Representative Knapp. And you might have mentioned this, but I just want to touch back to it if you did, but if you didn't, I'd like to know. If we were to pass this, where do projects in a pipeline or contracts let for maybe some grants, things, how would that be affected? Is there anything in that regard we should think about or know or understand?
Chairman Knapp.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Representative Lawley, I did touch on it just a little bit, but there's a very separate path between grants and what these laws actually did. I do believe in grants from our state or federally for technology that could help with EOR or carbon sequestration. Those will not be affected by what we do here today. What we do here today strictly deals with what we've created as mandates and codified EPA law versus our technology and our granting for that technology in oil recovery.
Follow up.
Thank you,
Representative Lawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know they're in separate paths, but have there been some grants that have been started that were directed towards the mandates here to providing or complying, or that's what I'm trying to get at, is any connections, but is there some of those that you mentioned that there might be for enhanced oil recovery? It's still early. But I'm just trying to understand kind of these other consequences, just to know what those would be.
Representative Knapp.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Representative Lawley, a good example is the ITC Test Center up in Campbell County. That is a place where people can come to try out technology hooked onto a power plant. And that has maintained its separate identity from this law. We continue to grant funds to corporations trying to create technology. And I think that will continue in the future as well. This will not prevent that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Any further questions? Seeing none, Representative, you may return to the dais up here. We'll now ask the governor's office to come forward for their testimony.
few pieces of
Well, thank you for keeping the growth of trees in.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Randall Luthi. I'm the Policy Director for Governor Gordon. Representative Knapp has done an excellent job, I think, of laying out what the bill does. In reality, I'm 98% there, all right? And I think where we do differ on some key things about whether or not this bill is necessary. Maybe just to touch off, just to let you know what I would like to talk about this morning. And maybe first of all, you guys were up late, and I appreciate that. Well, when you're up late, I'm up late. So we're about the same situation, but thank you for your willingness to listen to me this morning. What I have in front of you are a few pieces of paper. What you should have is a copy of last year's bill, Senate File 42, as well as you already have 209. I brought Senate File 42U just because I tried to copy the existing law out of our Green Book, and it just didn't copy at all. So I thought if we use Senate File 42, that gave you an idea of the bill, the law that you're actually repealing. Because by necessity, HB 209 just says it's repeal. So this just gives you the language that you would actually be repealing. In addition, I've got a somewhat of a historical presentation, which I think I just want to go through some of the history of Wyoming and coal. Overall, almost half of your committee, Mr. Chairman, are new. Not all of you are new here today, but I never want to give up an opportunity to talk about Wyoming and coal. So I really appreciate that. Maybe just two things as we start off in responding to Representative Knapp. Just a little nuance on the Chevron doctrine. That is really a court created doctrine. And Representative Knapp was absolutely correct. When an agency makes rules, sometimes they make decisions of what the law meant. And years ago in a Chevron case, hence Chevron, the court said, we're going to give deference to the agency's view. Thank heavens, I say, that has now been reversed. So now it's an even playing field when you go to court. You know, those industry representatives, whomever it is, all of them are given the same weight of what that rule means. So I couldn't agree more. That's a great thing. Second, a slight clarification. HB 200 actually set its own standards back in 2020. They were not EPA standards. Senate File 42 last year amended those, and those are standards to meet the 45Q requirements, meaning that if you want the tax credits that the federal government provided to you, those are the standards. So they're technically Treasury standards, not EPA. All right, so with that, Mr. Chairman, my presentation has a little bit of history. I want to talk about options for amendments, and then I'm going to end up with a suggestion of a path forward, where I hope that we will go.
Please proceed.
Thank you. Wyoming and coal. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, we have a long, great history. We produce coal, more coal than any other state, and we have done so, I believe, since about 1976. We have 16 coal mines. We have some of the largest coal mines in the world. Over 5,000 direct people work for the coal mines, and those average salaries are over $83,000 a year. Those are good jobs. The coal industry is vital to Wyoming. We, and I mean we as the legislature, the governor's office, are dedicated to making sure that coal remains viable in Wyoming. Coal is overwhelmingly used for electric generation. In Wyoming, we have 12 coal-fired power plants. And we ship coal to about, I've got 26, but I started looking at some other figures. It's probably closer to 24, maybe 25 states that we're still shipping coal to. What do we ship that coal for? Overwhelmingly, nearly every bit of it is electric generation. Our biggest users are, interestingly enough, Texas, Missouri, Wyoming, Wisconsin, and Illinois. The next slide gives you an idea of our current coal-fired power plants. And I think the first thing you notice is the age. Our coal-fired power plants are all average over 40 years of age. We require all the regulated utilities to file a plan called an integrated resource plan that gives an idea of what they're going to do in the next 20 years. And back about 8 years ago, we started seeing the IRP started mentioning we're going to be shutting down these coal plants, particularly Rocky Mountain Power with Naughton, with Jim Bridger, with Dave Johnston. That third column gives you an idea of where we are right now. Those are the closure dates that they've given. Now, some of those closure dates were a result of lawsuits because of particulate matter, SOx and NOx reaching an agreement that they would eventually shut down. I have good news. If you would look at Jim Bridger 1, 2, 3, and 4, and Naughton 1 and 2, usually what many coal-fired power plants do, they have an option to go to gas. They are. And the reason why those dates are in parentheses is because in their last draft IRP that was filed last month, they have removed those closure dates. That's good news. And I would submit to you, one of the reasons those closure dates have been moved is because of HB 200. The coal market has changing. It is changing. You know, our coal production has declined a third, some would say 2/5 in the last, since 2015. We had 2 years of a reprieve, 22, 23, but in 24, once again, it appeared we were in a decline. Why? Largely because coal-fired power plants are switching. Some are closing, most are switching to gas, and there's a lot more renewables on the market. Why? That can be federal or state requirements, and it's also consumer preference. We actually find that many consumers just want lower CO2 fuel. There's also a change in the energy market. Electricity from coal nationwide is down to about 20%. And just to compare, in 1990, it was over 50%. But the big switch, as I mentioned, has been to natural gas, because that now supplies about 40%. For Wyoming, that's a mixed blessing. We have gas, we have coal. But you are switching from one to the other. Renewables nationwide actually surpassed the amount of electricity produced by coal last year. Good news, fossil fuels still provide 60% of the nation's energy. Even Wyoming, we've had that change. We used to produce 97% of our electricity from coal. We're now down to about 71%. Wind produced 23% of Wyoming's electricity in 2023. And when we talk about renewables in Wyoming, it really is wind. It's 90% of the market. If we talk about those who use energy in Wyoming, industry consumes well over 50% of the electricity produced in Wyoming. Overall, we produce 12 times more energy than we use. Overall, about 60% of our electricity is exported. Rocky Mountain Power in particular is higher. About 83% of the electricity they produce is exported. So what is the pressure on Wyoming as I see it? One, other states have developed renewable portfolio standards. I just call your attention to that. What that means is they have mandated how much of their energy will come from generally no CO2, no greenhouse gas, no fossil fuel sources of energy. Washington, Oregon, California, often is referred to the left coast, has actually passed statutes, their legislature passed statutes to diminish the use of coal, particularly between years 2025 and 2030. It's coming. And we have consumers just wanting lower CO2. Federal government has always been a problem in this, I would say, to a most degree. Under the Clean Air Act, they have continued to tighten requirements down. Regional haze, these are all things that many of you have heard, SOx and NOx, all of that continues to increase. And again, that is the pressure on Wyoming coals. We talk about the Clean Power Plan that was actually submitted by the Obama administration. It was in 2015. This is one of those cases Representative Knapp referred to. The Supreme Court said you can't do such a sweeping thing with coal-fired power plants. Basically, it was they had set state level caps. The Supreme Court said you couldn't do that. However, EPA has also made a determination that CO2 is an endangerment to human health. The Supreme Court did not change that standard. The Biden administration has their own version of the Clean Power Plan. It became final last March, I believe. Basically, here are your choices if you're a coal-fired plant. By 2030, you've got to decide, A, shut down, B, switch to gas, or 3, C, 1, 2, A, B, C, don't want to confuse my identifiers, switch to carbon capture. I put carbon capture and storage there, but just a real quick explanation. I use storage as a more general term. Even enhanced oil recovery is storage. Sequestration is another thing. That is considered permanent storage. All right, so in 2023, just last year, our Supreme Court, the most conservative Supreme Court probably we've seen in my lifetime, upheld EPA's ability on that endangerment finding. So we're not out of the woods, even with a good Supreme Court. We are in litigation, and so we hope that with the new administration that we'll be able to, either that rule will be, well, they can't really repeal it, but they could start over again, or the courts could say again, it's gone beyond what EPA should do. So again, going back a little in history, this is what Wyoming started to do. Wyoming years ago, through its legislature, recognized that CO2 could be an issue, and they started moving forward. One of the first things they did was create the Integrated Test Center. Representative Knapp, you've been there, you've seen it. It's a great facility. It is run by the School of Energy Resources. I invite all of you to go see it. It is connected with an actual existing coal-fired power plant, and it uses the flue gas from that plant to test various forms of carbon capture. What we're going to find out, I'm sure, is there are different forms of capture, and some are cheaper than others. I appreciate that they're doing that. Legislative support for a long time for CO2. We actually have a mechanism, should we want to, should industry want to use CO2 for EOR or store or sequester it. That is an option. A few years ago, Senate File 159 prohibited the sale of coal-fired power plants unless you offered it for sale. That was the first wake-up call, I think, to our utilities. Wyoming's just not going to sit and let you close our coal-fired power plants. HB 200 was a part of that. That was the next one. And basically what it does, we took a lesson from those states that passed renewable portfolio standards. We said, we want you, utilities, to evaluate carbon capture. Now, we talk about mandates. It did tell them they had to evaluate carbon capture. They do not have to install it, but it did say they had to evaluate it. And I think that's actually been a plus. Have we reached where we've reached that point? Maybe, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. It also set a cap. It said, utilities, if you're going to evaluate and pass that on to the consumers, you cannot pass more than, you have a cap of 2%. If you do the repeal, that disappears. So utilities could continue to evaluate, but they will not be limited to how much they can pass it on. It also allowed cost recovery and benefit, meaning from the sale of CO2. Utilities would be able to sell that CO2 and put it either back in their rate base or as a dividend. That would also be repealed if you go this route. But the intent was to have utility companies start talking to partners in the CO2 world, and I believe it is working. As I mentioned, changes last year was to meet the 45Q requirements. 45Q basically says, here's a tax break if you do something with CO2. You get $85 if you sequester it, $60 if you use it for EOR. We continued energy matching funds. We talked about those. They are used to promote energy projects. And we litigate. Last 4 years, that's exactly what we've done. There's also a contract with the Energy Policy Network that promotes PRB coal. And one of the questions we have, and I'd love this committee to start looking at, is in general, when a utility decides to build a new plant, build a wind farm, any big addition, at least with Rocky Mountain Power, you're able to spread those costs throughout the system, meaning those people in California help pay for it. When California passes a law that says they're not going to take coal-fired power anymore, that inhibits that ability to do it. We believe if you're going to supply energy, you ought to help pay for it, whether it comes from coal or otherwise. So I look forward to working with the committee on maybe a solution. All right, here's, if you've fallen asleep, which I don't blame any of you for that, here's what I would like to focus on. We have a new administration. It is definitely going to help. Trump administration is going to help. It's going to take a while. Even the new administrator, Lee Zeldin, he did not repeal that Clean Power Plan. He was ordered to evaluate it. So that's going to take some time. There is current carbon technology alive and well and actually being used. Petronova in Texas captures CO2 off a power plant and uses it for EOR. Project Tundra is they're in their final planning stages and will probably decide this year if they're going to build a plant. And Representative Knapp, you're absolutely correct. That could be up to $1 billion. You're absolutely correct. They have a $350 million federal grant to help them on their way. ITC will continue to study, but the more carbon capture plants that are built, the more the cost will go down. But Wyoming also has the opportunity for carbon management as a brand new industry. Wyoming law provides that surface owners own the pore space. This allows a surface owner, a landowner, should they want, to lease their pore space for storage or sequestration of CO2. Just let you know that it's out there. Other states are very interested in that. There's Class 6. These wells that you use to put CO2 in the ground, deep in the ground, are referred to as Class 6. Wyoming has primacy now from the EPA, meaning EPA doesn't make that decision on how to do it, Wyoming does. We were the second state, North Dakota was the first, Louisiana now does, and so does West Virginia. Those are oil and gas states. There's a reason they're interested in having that Class 6 primacy, and it's to help their industry. All right, now here's a real slide, right? We'll wake you all up for this one. We talked about this, the coal sales to other states. This gives you an idea of who we sell our coal to. Those that have renewable portfolio standards or zero carbon standards that we're currently selling coal to. You'll see are 18 states, 64, almost 70% of our market. 70% of our market, approximately, we're selling to states that have renewable portfolio standards that want lower CO2. If we're going to remain in the business, we got to figure a way to meet their standards. Those are not federal, those are state. Here's another, I think, interesting. If all of Wyoming's electricity, and I mean all of it, not that that's being, even that's currently being supplied by, say, hydropower, if we were to use only coal to produce that electricity, that would be just under 9.5 million tons. We supplied 230 million tons of coal last year. One mine in Campbell County produced about 60 million tons. We don't have the consumer base to keep our coal industry alive. All right, real quickly. Now, HB 200, what have they done? Rocky Mountain Power is one of those. They evaluated Jim Bridger 3 and 4. And the reason why do you get a FEED study? Because they're telling us that most companies won't partner with them until you go so far down the list. Here's, I think, the good news. In their latest filing with the PSC, they said this is a feasible technology that we can use for units 3 and 4. They have a partner, and they'll be reducing that surcharge you talked about to about 12 cents on a $100 bill. They'll use energy matching funds. They've been at least applied for them. They also evaluated Dave Johnston. They have a partner up there who is going to pick up the cost of the feed and pre-feed studies at no cost to the consumer. This particular one is a pre-combustion as opposed to most carbon capture, which is post-combustion. Cheyenne Light and Fuel, their surcharge will now be down to 0. I think they're through with whatever testing they're going to do. They're going to make a decision on whether or not they're going to do anything. One other thing on the next one, should you repeal HB 200, you are also repealing. You gave the PSC the ability, when they're to determine power quality and reliability standards, you gave them extra authority to make sure that if you're going to do wind, solar, renewables, that you have a certain, it's got to meet a certain degree of reliability. All right, I'm there. I'm nearly there. Appreciate it. Is HB 200 still necessary? Yes, I believe it is. We got to respond to that out-of-state market. I do believe it may be entering or near a time when it isn't necessary. So these are some of the ideas that I'd like you to consider. If you go back to Senate File 42 and the original bill, you will see I've circled a lot of shalls. You might want to amend those to mays if you know the mandate seems to be an issue. If you also would look at, I would also suggest maybe we got a new administration. I suggest maybe a sunset clause. Let's sunset 200, let's say January 1, 2027. That would give the administration 2 years to sort through a lot of these. That would be another way. But here's my big recommendation I think that you should do. I believe that you should table 209 and then work with your committee and the Management Council to make all carbon issues an interim study for this committee. You guys have always been willing to take on hard and thorny issues, and this could certainly be one of them. Again, we've got an opportunity to work with the new administration. EPA regs are still in place. You have a lot of CO2 issues in Wyoming. How do we use it for enhanced oil recovery? Do we continue to use it for sequestration? There are transportation limits of how you get CO2 to where you need. Again, let's look at that. How can the WEA and their grant, if we survive the JAC, how can we have WEA use those grants to help overall policy? If you want more CO2, how do we get it if we don't want to take it directly out of the atmosphere? I think our best source are coal-fired power plants. These are all things that you could look at. And this could be done with the legislature, industry, utilities, School of Energy Resources, landowners, WEA, and of course the governor's office would be happy to join you in that. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I hope I've worn you all down. But actually, I hope the history was of use to all of you, and I'd be happy to attempt to answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Luthi. Appreciate this. Committee, any questions for the governor's office or Mr. Luthi? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Oh, I did wear you down. Thank you.
Any other departments of the government? Departments of the state government. Chairman Throne, thank you for being here.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Mary Throne, Chairman of the Public Service Commission. Mr. Luthi covered most of where we are and what we've done at the Public Service Commission. But I just thought I'd give you a little more specifics about what we've been doing with House Bill 200. I think one of the main points I want to emphasize first, though, is we have never interpreted House Bill 200 as mandating the commercial scale of a project that's not economic. So we've just been in the research and development and planning stage, and if the ultimate result of those efforts on the part of now just Rocky Mountain Power and Cheyenne Light do not produce economic projects, then we wouldn't approve them. That's not what we do. And we've never interpreted the bill to require that. The good news, and Mr. Luthi mentioned it, but I want to explain a little bit more about what it means, is Rocky Mountain Power, as part of what it's called its integrated resource plan, this is the update, just the short version, and that's the 2024 update. Their preferred portfolio, meaning part of their whole generation mix, now includes carbon capture as on Jim Bridger 3 and 4 as part of the preferred portfolio. And we haven't analyzed that yet, blessed it or anything, but what that means is that they've concluded that carbon capture on Bridger 3 and 4 is economic, that it's an economic generation source for them to pursue. So in the context of House Bill 200, what that means is it's a system cost. And House Bill 200 only applies the 2% that we've been talking about to the incremental costs. So if carbon capture is part of Rocky Mountain's preferred portfolio, only the additional costs beyond related to implementing House Bill 200 would be covered because it's part of their system. They've concluded that it's economic. And in my opinion, it's Oregon and Washington and California's problem then if they don't want to take coal-fired power that's low carbon. I mean, that's the dilemma. So I think we've made progress. I think House Bill 200, along with other efforts, the changes to 45Q, all of those things have, and frankly, the need for reliable power. We are in an era of load growth. We have not been in an era of load growth. So we have load growth, we have wildfire risk, we have continuing, whatever happens at the federal level, we still have continuing market pressures and state standards pushing for low carbon or zero carbon energy. So that's the world that we live in. And so with House Bill 200, I think it's not the right time from our perspective to repeal it because we're kind of in the middle of everything. There's a need to finish what's been started, I guess. And I think the flexibility in the statute allows us to protect the ratepayers. But of course, we don't make policy, you do. And it was admittedly a challenge for us to implement this bill, but we've done that and we're moving forward. And we're waiting for the final plan from Cheyenne Light, I think, which is coming at the end of March. The changes you adopted in SF 42 to basically eliminate the requirement for Black Hills, which is mainly a South Dakota utility with part of it in Wyoming. That was very, very helpful. So now we're really only looking at Cheyenne Light and Rocky Mountain Power. And then Mr. Luthi mentioned the reliability standards. So we have issued orders consistent with the legislation that passed last year, creating baseline reliability standards for for power quality and reliability metrics. And those are part of what's proposed for repeal, that authority. So I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Chairman Throne. Any questions for the chairman? Representative Lawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here, Chairman Throne. Could you expand a little bit on your statement about we're kind of in the middle, we're still working through, you mentioned a few things, but I do think that's kind of an important thing about trying to understand the repeal and how it might affect things already in motion. That was kind of earlier question I asked too, but probably not very artfully. But anyway, could you kind of expand on that a little bit?
Chairman?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lawley. So as Mr. Luthi mentioned, Rocky Mountain Power has, they're doing the FEED studies on Jim Bridger. They've got the research projects on Dave Johnston and Wyodak. And then with Cheyenne Light, I'm a little less clear on where Cheyenne Light is because we're waiting for the final plan. But their surcharge is now down to zero because they had done combined research with Black Hills. And so there were some synergies there. And so now we're just waiting for their next plan. And also another advantage that SF42 implemented was extending the deadline to 2033. So a lot of things are in flux.
Follow up? Representative Lawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for that, Chairman Throne. Would the suggestion of, at least in temporary situation and through till the interim, changing the shalls to mays, would that affect in any way the things that you just talked about?
Chairman Throne.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lawley, I doubt it, but I'd have to look at that.
All right. Any other questions for the chairman? Chairman Throne, I've got a couple of questions. I was here during the implementation and passing of HB 200, and a lot of that was driven because of legislation from what was called the left coast by previous testimony. And they,
You know, I'm part of the left, Mr. Chairman.
so we were trying to respond to some of the statutes that they were passing in Washington, Oregon, and California, and that was some of the impetus for HB 200. But you mentioned that we are in a load growth phase now. There, with AI and all the things that are transpiring, there's a shortage of electricity, and even here in Wyoming, a lot of these large projects, that's the first thing they ask is, do you have enough power? So my question, Chairman Throne, is where is Washington, Oregon, and California going to get their power if they don't get it from Wyoming? They refuse to have nuclear. They have other issues with everything that comes about. So if they refuse to take our power, what are they going to do?
Mr. Chairman, I don't know. I think they are a little more open to nuclear, at least Washington is, and probably California, and probably Oregon. I think it's unfortunate that their legislatures have focused on coal and not on carbon. You know, I think their anti-coal legislation is just ridiculous. And frankly, it's tied the hands of their commissions. You know, I wouldn't want to be a commissioner in Oregon or Washington because I don't know how you would do it.
Thank you. Well, maybe when the lights go dim, they'll be grateful for coal. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Appreciate you being here. Any other departments from the state that would like to testify? Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Lon Whitman, I'm Director of the Enhanced Oil Recovery Institute. Not so much around the questions other than EOR. I thought it'd be important and helpful for the committee perhaps to have a little perspective from the Enhanced Oil Recovery Institute. about CO2 EOR and directions for CO2 and our needs. I think one important fact that sometimes is overlooked, all CO2 in Wyoming, every molecule since 1986 is captured CO2. The Exxon Chute Creek plant provides currently about 340 million a day for enhanced oil recovery. That's all captured CO2. So I think from the oil perspective, oil and gas industry perspective, where we get the CO2 isn't so much an issue, but we are going to need it, and we're likely to need significantly more. We have currently 7 projects in Wyoming that are using that 340 million a day. There are 4 developing projects, 2 of which will need significantly more than that volume. So we are seeing increased demands for EOR. And there are new areas that EORI is getting involved with, some we've never talked about yet, but the shale development in Wyoming, you watch and monitor shale wells. They're super high production early. They decline relatively rapidly, and then will have a flat rate for many, many years. I have started conversations with a number of the shale industry companies in Wyoming, and there is interest to look at CO2 in those coal or in the shale wells to increase and level out at least and keep that field life longer. So you're going to need CO2 for an area we have not worked in Wyoming with CO2 in shales, but I do believe that will be developing soon. So it's just to give that perspective that CO2, and I think you all understand the value of EOR in Wyoming. Currently, just under 10% of your oil production comes from enhanced oil recovery. We'd like to see that increase, and I think you will see that increase. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Whitman. Any questions? Mr. Whitman, oh, go ahead. Vice Chair Tarver.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Whitman, what would you feel is the most economic way to, I'm going to use harvest CO2? I mean, would it be from flue gas or would, I mean, can you give us an idea of how we can harvest CO2 the most economic way?
Mr. Whitman.
Mr. Chairman, the best would be if we had natural CO2 sources, which we do not have in Wyoming, which allows us to take advantage of anthropogenic CO2 and the 45Q tax benefits. Cost-wise, that's not really an area, Mr. Chairman, where EORI spends much time evaluating capture versus this. They do a lot of really good work at SER under Dr. Krutka. I think your ITC is an area where you can see these capture costs, the technologies, and test and see what works, the costs associated. I think we see some projects that are potentially moving forward. The 8 Rivers on Dave Johnston or WyoDAC. The advantage for the oil and gas industry there is that your CO2 source is located right where there are oil fields needing it. And you would minimize some of that CO2 pipeline transport issue. The current developing project near Gillette plans, for instance, a 40-mile spur off that Green Core pipeline. That pipeline alone is $40 million estimated. His capital costs to start that project well over $100 million. So that question about how do we support CO2 pipeline development, I think is a valid one. That company has put in a proposal to the Wyoming Energy Authority for matching funds for that spur. This committee had several presentations from EORI about are we or should we be incentivizing pipeline development. So the company did put in a proposal and hopefully there'll be support for that. I think those kinds of things are important. The projects in Glenrock, that's a 60-mile line if he needs to take CO2 from the Contango line. That's $1 million a mile just for the pipeline. So I think you're addressing some of the really key issues that are important for CO2 EOR development in Wyoming.
Mr. Whitman, you mentioned that you characterized the Exxon CO2 as captured CO2. I would say it's more of a produced CO2 because it comes from the Madison Formation. So with your characterization, would you say that the helium that they have in the Exxon Chute Creek plant and the methane is also captured rather than produced?
Mr. Chairman, that's a good question. I think the suggestion of captured, their primary product of interest is helium. And for helium to produce, they have associated CO2 and methane. So to provide the product helium, they strip out CO2 through a process and methane. Parts of it are re-injected, but to produce the CO2 for enhanced oil recovery, generally that's considered a capture technology and the largest CCUS project in the world. So yeah, there could be a difference of opinion about that characterization, but that isn't their primary product, CO2 at Chute Creek or at the LaBarge field.
Okay, thank you. There is a difference of opinion there because it is produced out of the formation. It comes naturally. It's not captured from any incineration or any direct air capture. But we do have one of the largest reservoirs of CO2 in Wyoming. That Madison Formation is huge, and to this day, it hasn't been determined how large it actually is. So Wyoming is abundant with CO2. We have a lot of CO2 that can be produced rather than captured. And when that plant was originally designed, it was to produce CO2 as well as methane. The helium was an afterthought. So thank you very much for your
You're
testimony.
welcome.
Any other departments of the state that would like to testify? Any citizens in the room that would like to testify on House Bill 209? Thank you for being here. Please state
Thank
your
you.
name for the record.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Lexi Darty. I'm representing Americans for Prosperity in support of this
So
bill.
you're representing a group. This is for just
Oh,
citizens at this point.
My
Lexi.
apologies.
Any citizens in the room that would like to discuss and provide testimony? Seeing none. Lexi, stay there. Okay, now we'll hear from you.
Sorry about that.
Please
Mr.
proceed.
Chairman. This bill, I think, is a pretty straightforward bill, repealing outdated low-carbon energy standard requirements that have contributed to the rising electricity costs in the state of Wyoming. While we do support efforts to advance carbon reutilization in the state, government mandates just distort the energy market by attempting to dictate the direction of the technology. Really, it's nothing short of attempting to put its thumb on the scale of the direction of technology. So hoping this legislation will help lower rates because it certainly helped to raise the electricity costs originally. So I want to keep it brief, leave it there. So with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for your testimony. Any other individuals representing business entities? Mr. Detai, thank you for being here. It's always a pleasure when you can share your knowledge.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Really appreciate the debate today, and I appreciate Representative Knapp and his work on this, and Mr. Luthi in the governor's office. Just a couple of comments. The whole issue of carbon capture is really one that has been forced on us from the outside, and it may surprise some folks in this room, but I'm not a magician. But if I was, and I had a magic wand, I would take us back a quarter of a century and just let us burn coal the way we did it in the 1990s and the early 2000s, when Wyoming Coal was providing for roughly 20% of the entire electricity generation portfolio in the United States. Wyoming was powering 20% of the country. And we were doing it cleanly, we were doing it the way we were, and, you know, and those days are just gone. And the politics of carbon capture and of green energy, it's just where we are right now. And so, you know, as we go forward with this debate, I don't think, you know, listening to members of the committee, to Representative Knapp, to the governor's office, I think there's no question about where we want to go. It's just how we want to get there. And so what I think, you know, not to get lost in the mix is that, you know, the coal industry supports carbon capture for emissions, and I want to be clear on that, for emissions, because we feel that's the way forward if we're going to go, as was alluded to earlier. Our customers in other states, they're demanding cleaner emissions. That's just the hand we've been dealt, and we've got to get there. So the industry is supportive of those efforts, and Wyoming has been leading the way, has been mentioned. The great work at the ITC, the work at the School of Energy Resources. So we're on the edge, you know, we're on the leading edge of that, and we don't want to lose that. We've got a great opportunity with the new Trump administration and to change the headwinds a little bit. We're not going to have the headwinds. We're going to have a little wind behind our sails. But I don't think you can lose sight that, you know, I'm in the political arena for almost 30 years now. And in that time, I think I've seen 3 permanent majorities come and go. And my point is that the pendulum swings. And we've got 4 years of opportunity, you know, let's not take our foot off the gas pedal and keep pursuing these efforts at achieving viable, commercially viable carbon capture for emissions for not only our power plants, but for our other industrial facilities too, because that's something that often gets lost in the mix, is that we have industrial facilities here that are producing CO2, and their customers are demanding cleaner emissions as well. So let's not take our foot off the gas pedal. You know, we've kind of been agnostic and kind of watching, you know, the debate over the mandates and stuff. I think it's borne some fruit, and whether it's the time to repeal or whether to let it go, you know, that's up to the body to decide, and you guys can work with the governor's office on that, but that's where we are. But I think it's really important to continue to keep in mind that, you know, we could be, you know, 4 years goes in a blink of an eye, and depends on how things go, we could be right back in the same situation where we were, you know, 6 to 8 months ago, when everyone's panicking about, you know, how we're going to keep our coal-fired our plants going. And I think you know, Mr. Luthi kind of hit on some of our stats. You know, when we talk about our coal resource in Wyoming, we've got 165 billion tons of recoverable coal that we can get to today. We got a total resource of 1.4 trillion tons of coal that may become a reserve, that may be a resource that may become a reserve someday that we can get to. So the debate should not center around whether we're trying to save coal. The coal's not going away. It's how we can focus on how we continue to responsibly use the resource. And we do that through technology and innovation. And, you know, just as we're having this debate and going forward, we've got to keep trying to crack the carbon capture nut. And whether you sequester it, whether you store it, whether you use it for enhanced oil recovery, we're agnostic to that. What our focus is from the industry side is we've got to figure out a way to keep our coal fleet up and running, to meet our customer demands, and to do the technology for the next generation so that we can build new plants. So that's where we are on this, and appreciate your work and appreciate the opportunity to weigh in. And you know, it's a tough issue, but the industry is supportive of those efforts to continue to develop carbon capture technology. How you get there, you're the policymakers. It's up to you, but that's where we are on that, Mr. Chairman. And I'd stand for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Detaille. Vice Chair Tarver, please.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Detaille, you made a great point. We're sitting on a lot of coal. That being said, how much coal can we actually mine right now for the purposes of generation?
So,
Mr. Detaille.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Vice Chairman Tarver, of the reserve of recoverable coal, we've got 165 billion tons that we can mine. Now, the economics might play into that because the coal seams are going deeper. It may be a little bit more to cost you, but as far as where we are technologically, and of course, you'd have to lease it. I mean, that's the big thing too, which we can't do right now. past 2035, but it's 165 billion tons that we can get to today.
Vice Chair Tarver, follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I want to drill down on that exactly. So what is our time frame right currently that we have leased? And I think we've had this conversation before, but as of right now, we're not leasing any. We're not allowed to. So can you please explain exactly how much time we got left?
Sure. So, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman Tarver, right now, an estimate of coal under lease in the Powder River Basin, we've got about 4 billion tons under lease right now. Now, depending on how that's used and depending on the company that has it leased, you could look for anywhere from 10 to 15 years worth of coal leased.
Thank you.
And that's kind of where we are right now. And without, and it takes a long time to get a lease, about 10 years for the leasing process. So if we're not able to start working on new leases right now, we're going to be running up against a window we're going to find ourselves in a spot.
All right, thank you, Mr. Detai. Seeing no further questions, thank you for your testimony.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate it.
Good morning, Mr. Bush.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. David Bush here representing Black Hills Energy. Also Cheyenne Light Fuel and Power is, that's our local utility here in Cheyenne, as has been referenced. So really just wanted to make myself available if there's any questions for the committee about where we are in the things. I know we've talked to this committee over the past year or so on several projects, and the work of this committee last year on Senate File 42 was helpful in making those changes to House Bill 200 that helped us continue to kind of comply with the law and that sort of thing. So we're not opposed, we're not in support, we're just here to answer questions. And since our company's been referenced a couple times, I just thought I'd come up and.
Thank you, Mr. Bush. Any questions for Mr. Bush? Sorry, we don't have any.
Well, darn it.
Well, thank you for being here. Thank you for being willing to testify.
Thank you.
Any other individuals from the representing companies that would like to testify? Seeing none, we'll close public testimony. Committee, what is your pleasure? For lack of a motion, no motions. For lack of a motion, that bill will lie on the table. Representative Lawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would say that I know we're trying to kind of keep track of potential interim topics, but I think that some good points have been made about ultimately looking closely at this, whether we fully amend or fully delete it, the House Bill, what used to be called House Bill 200, or not, or we amend it to keep certain things in. Also, this idea of the pipelines, just the CO2 in general, honestly, I think is a good topic for the interim.
Thank you, Representative Lawley. And I might mention to the committee, if the portal will open up in a couple of weeks for interim topics, and hopefully you're keeping your own list of topics that you would like to have discussed this summer. With that, we'll move on to House Bill 183, and I'll turn over the gavel to Vice Chair Tarver.
Chairman, could you please bring your bill forth and explain it to us?
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. My name is Scott Heiner, representing the House District 18 in Southwest Wyoming. I bring you House Bill 183, which is net metering amendments. Just for a little bit of background, what net metering is, if an individual puts a rooftop solar or ground-based solar panel at their residence or small business, they can have up to 25 kilowatts with current law. That's the ceiling. And they work in collaboration with the utility such that if they have an excess amount of energy, it flows into the utility. There's a two-way meter there. and then they can draw upon that utility when they need additional electricity. Hopefully, it's designed so that the person with the solar panels utilizes most of the solar energy being generated as a self-generator. But during the night, evening hours or times when they don't have enough, they can draw upon the utilities' power. At the end of every month, that meter is looked at. If the customer actually used more than they put on, than they generated, and the utility provided more energy, then the customer would pay for that difference at the end of the month. If they used less than they generated, and there was actually some more going on to the utility than they received, then they got a credit, and that carried to the next month. And that continues to be reconciled every month, but at the end of the year, that credit is zeroed out at the avoided cost for solar energy. And the avoided cost for solar energy right now on Rocky Mountain Power, this is non-firm base, it's 1.7 cents a kilowatt hour. So that's what the cash out is. So 1.7 cents per kilowatt hour for anything that's at the end of the year left as a credit on their bill. So not a huge amount of money. It's pretty cheap. You look at your bill, what you're paying for electricity, you know, it's quite a bit more than that. So what this does, this bill actually changes that threshold. It'll still stay at 25 kilowatts for a residential customer, self-generator, but for a small business, they will be able to go up to 200 kilowatts. Now, is this a new idea? No, Utah allows 25 kilowatts for residential and 2 megawatts for a small business owner. So this opens it up for school districts, for government entities, your towns, your municipalities that have larger loads, and they may have a garage or a parking area, a lot of buildings where they can put rooftop solar and be able to defer some of the cost that the electricity is for these utilities or for these small businesses. Airports, we've had a lot of conversation with airports throughout the state that they would like to be able to defray some of the increasing cost of electricity. But because of current statute, they can only go up to 25 kilowatts. This bill also makes it so if you have a number of meters in the same locality, you can aggregate them together. So let's say you're a municipality and you have a building with a number of meters serving that building, then you can aggregate those together and actually have more than just the 200 kilowatts limit. So if you're serving a couple of buildings with 3 meters, you could go up to 600 kilowatts and put rooftop solar on your parking garage. For instance, a school district could do that. But it still has to be in that same, and in the bill, there's some criteria there. On page 3, it says the additional meter has to be located on the premises, and the electricity is only for the customer generator's use, and it all has to be on the same rate schedule. So you can't have 3-phase power and single-phase power in the same locality and aggregate those meters together. They all have to be on the same rate schedule. And they all have to be served from the same primary feeder line. So what this does is we, with our new energy policy that we introduced earlier this month, we want to have a level playing field, and we discourage big solar farms that are going to eat up our land, that's going to hurt wildlife. But if we want alternative energy such as solar, what an ideal spot than on top of a roof. Now, there's going to be some discussion about the burden this places upon the utilities, but there's a number of studies that show that a distributed power source actually provides more reliability for the utilities. Rather than having all the power coming in on these large transmission lines, you see them being built throughout Wyoming in the last few years that cost billions of dollars. And there's a line loss. That's not free power coming in, be transported on those transmission lines because there's a line loss. And that has to be accounted for. But if you have a true distributed load, some of the load within your service area, that reduces the amount of power that you have to bring in from the outside. So in 2021, there were only 120 systems in the whole state. This is not a big deal. Right now, we have about 0.6% of our state has solar power from small customers, rooftop solar, 0.6%. There's some studies that show market saturation is somewhere around 10%, and some of our neighboring states have reached that 10%, and it's gotten to where it is a burden upon those communities or those utilities, but 0.6 is quite a ways away from that. And so in the bill, we put in at the very last page, a notification, once we get up to 5%, that we can react and maybe slow this program down. But will we ever get to 5% in Wyoming? Maybe in Nevada or California, there's a lot of more sunshine days there, but Wyoming, maybe not. And just one more thing. It says with the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, there's $2 billion available for renewable energy systems. So airports, municipalities, small business owner, they would like to utilize some of that money, but we have this limit of 25 kilowatts. It is limiting our small businesses from the opportunity of going and getting some of that help to install the infrastructure to help them be insulated from rate increases and have the ability to put larger solar collectors upon their roofs. So with that, I'm open for questions. Vice Chair.
Committee, do we have any questions? Mr. Chairman, I got one question for you. So you were saying 1.7 cents is what the utilities have to pay. And then you said something about each month they reconcile. They don't pay every month, do they? Is it just at the end of the year? How does that work exactly?
Vice Chair, thank you for the question. So if the customer uses more electricity than they generate, they have to pay full retail rate for that difference. But if they don't use as much as they generate, it goes as a credit for the next month. And then but they still pay for their base costs, the service fees and all those little adders. They just don't pay for any energy charge. And if you look at your bill, the energy charge is maybe a half or a little over the total cost. Depends on the amount, energy costs may be 8-9 cents per kilowatt hour, depends on the utility. So they just won't pay that part, but they'll pay all the other parts of your bill. If you look at your bill, there's all these line items there, numerous things. And that carries over month to month. But at the end of the year, the end of the calendar year, by statute, they have to go to zero. So if there's still a credit on your bill at the end of the year, the utility will pay you for that credit at 1.7 cents. So you start off, and the reason is this, is so when you go into the high demand period of the utility, which is for most of our utilities is summertime, you don't have a big credit that you can utilize. It's a benefit to the utility that way.
So piggybacking off of that question, our power providers, what do they pay for, I guess, commercialized power? What are they paying for that power? Do you know the answer?
So, thank you, Vice Chair. There's a number of rate structures for avoided cost. And avoided cost is by definition, is what it would cost the utility to go outside and purchase this power. So 1.7 cents is kind of what they're paying for. And I'm talking about Rocky Mountain Power, not some of these other utilities. And I have their rate structure here, but 1.7 cents is what they pay for solar, fixed solar, non-firm energy price, 1.7 cents. That was in 2020. I'm sorry, 2023 is 1.3 cents, so it's even less. So it changes every year. But if it's a rotating solar panel, then they pay a little bit higher because it collects more energy. If it's a firm power, then they're going to pay a little bit more. If it's base load, hydro or a coal-fired power plant, it's going to be quite a bit higher.
Do you know what those numbers are, Mr. Chairman?
I don't have that with me,
Okay,
and I have a general idea, but it's not accurate, so I'm not going to guess.
okay, thank you. Anyone else, committee? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman.
Do we have anyone from the governor's office that would like to speak on this? Do we have any citizens that are not affiliated or professional talkers in here that would like to come up and speak on this? Please come forward. And when you get here, if you would state your name and give us your testimony, that would be great. Did you turn it on? There's a.
It is green.
Is it green? There you go. Thank you.
I just need to get closer.
Yeah, perfect.
Sorry about that. Chairman, representatives, I'm Tim Tykert from Cokeville, Wyoming. I'm part of, my brother and I have the Tykert Brothers LLC, a cattle ranch. We raise hay there in Cokeville. We had applied for a REAP grant under the rural development to be able to put in a solar on top of a hay shed. To do this. In May of last year, Rocky Mountain Power signed the agreement so that we could go ahead and do this. But we can only go up to the 25. Our system would produce 231 kilowatts, which would basically cover what we produce or what we use in our pumping bill. We pay $80,000 plus each year, and each year it continues to go up to pump for our irrigation. We're not a commercial provider. It would all be on us. We've had to do this just to keep up with the rates. As power, I mean, other than the interest on the land, my energy costs are my largest cost. And it's getting to the point that every year when they go for another rate increase of 14%, we're getting to the point where we cannot compete. We can't go to the Public Service Commission and ask for a 14% raise on our cattle or on our hay. And so it's just one of the things that in order to compete and to be able to, if we could burn coal, we would. And we want, being from Lincoln County, we want you to know that we're completely behind coal. But to offset these costs, we've got to have something in there, and it needs to be able to level the playing field. I can go through my contracts that they gave me, and this is the book. This is just my contract. And in there, they'll tell you the first thing is they're not under any obligation to take my power or to buy my power or to do anything. But yet I have that REAP grant. I can't get paid for that. The money's there to help people, but we're not utilizing this unless we can go to raise that rate to where we can get up to over the 25. They don't even allow, in some states, to get past the 25, they'll allow a bank of meters. So each meter, you have 20 different meters there of 25 kilowatts. And they won't even allow me to do that. So I would just hope that you would approve this bill. I think it would definitely level the playing field.
Mr. Tinkert, thank you very much for your testimony. Committee, would you like to ask any questions? Thank you, sir. If you would, state your name, sir, and give us your testimony.
Thank you, Representative. My name is Travis Spears. I'm with the Electric and Solar Specialist here in Cheyenne. I would ask that you guys approve this bill. This bill is something that is going to be very beneficial to the residents of the state of Wyoming. The ability to raise the cap for commercial applicants only to 200 kilowatts will help so many small businesses across this entire state. I 100% agree that leaving the 25 kilowatt cap for residential applications, it's going to cover 99.9% of residents. They don't typically use that much power. Our average size system that we install is probably between like an 8 and 10 kilowatt system for most home users across many different counties that we work in. Raising the utility side or the commercial side of this to 200 kilowatts will help many of our businesses here, even in Cheyenne. but we're utilizing the existing real estate without adding, and I'm sure you've heard from your constituents, the pollution or the skyline being obstructed with wind farms. Having our land being essentially taken over by solar farms. This is stuff that we can create power right here and use power right here. It's not getting transmitted down to states, many, states away. The ability to aggregate our solar systems that are being produced and set on properties. We have a ranch that we worked on up in Glen Rock that has 5 meters on their property. They were under the impression that they could install the 5 solar systems, 5 25 kilowatt solar systems to offset their usage. They had 3 meters that were exceeding the 25 kilowatt cap of what they were using. And then they have 2 other systems that are far exceeding the production of what their system is actually using. So they're getting paid back at the 1.73 cents a kilowatt or whatever it is, which is very, very minimal from what they're being charged for the power that they use on their other buildings. So that power that's being sent back to the grid that they're being compensated for is not a fair trade across the board for the cost that they paid to help produce those power that is now being put on the grid. The other difference is that our systems that are creating power on a commercial application of up to 200 kilowatts on a daily basis. Take, for example, Terrell Chevrolet here in Cheyenne. When are they open? They're open during the sun hours. You don't have techs there at nighttime, working, running pumps, running air compressors, running lifts, working on vehicles. They're there during the day when the sun is up. So this, allowing them to go to 200 kilowatts would offset their power by about 60%, maybe. So they're still gonna be paying for the power that they're not using, but that 60% that it is offsetting, that power can now be utilized for the growth of Cheyenne. We have a lot of different data centers that are planning on coming into the city of Cheyenne. And as we talked about earlier, that we may not have enough power, or do we have enough power, or where are we gonna get this power? We have coal that's already producing a lot of power. I'm not saying take that away. We have all these energy baskets. Let's not put all of our eggs in one basket. Let's utilize all of them. So in the event that one basket tips over, we still have other areas that we can supply power from. Again, I'm Travis Spears. I'll stand for any questions you guys may have.
Committee, do we have any questions? Mr. Spears, I would like to touch on one thing, and this is definitely this is something of contention. Do you feel that these people that are putting in the solar power, do you think they're actually doing it to save money or to make money? And a follow-up to that question is, so if the power providers, do you feel that they should have to pay more to get the solar power, or should it be on a level playing field? Because we know they have a lot of overhead expense. And I guess that's my main question.
So I'll definitely try to, I'm sorry, Representative Tarver, right? I want to make sure that I answer these kind of like the way you asked. So the first one is, do I feel that it is a level playing field, or they're buying it with the idea of making money versus utilizing it, right? That's the first question. So no, I don't believe that the idea of installing solar is to make money or have the utility pay you back. And the reason why I say that is because it's not financially smart. The amount that they pay you back is very minuscule to the amount that it costs to install that system. The idea of these systems, when we design these systems and sell these systems to our residents and our commercial applications, is that we are offsetting your power at 100%. That's ideal. Now, the way it sits now, if we do like a buy all, sell all, which is other options that happen with some utilities that will allow you to go above 25 kilowatts, because it has been stated by the Public Service Commission that they will allow you to go above 25 kilowatts as long as the utility is the one that is accepting of that. So if we do stuff like that, where it's a buy all, sell all, then there's no credit from month to month. So on a 25 kilowatt system, on a net metering, that is a 13th of their usage, is not beneficial to most of these small businesses, other than they can control the cost of that 13th% of what their monthly or annual rate of what they're paying for their power is. As long as their power doesn't change, then that is always going to be the same. The differences are is they're controlling that cost for whatever power that they're producing, knowing that whatever rate that they installed that system at is locked in for the life of that system. Now, usually these systems come with like a 25 or 30-year warranty, at least on the residential side. Commercial side, some of it's the same. Some panels don't have that long of a warranty. That doesn't mean these systems are going to stop producing or stop working at that time, but at least they're underneath warranty to show the production over that time. Now, when you first started driving, if you knew that your average cost of your fuel for your vehicle was going to stay the same and you could purchase that fuel in advance for, say, 25 years, would you have done it? I mean, when I started driving at 16, it was like 79 cents a gallon. So I'm not really dating myself as much as many other people, but at 79 cents a gallon, if I could have paid that, knowing that my average cost of that fuel was going to be, say, a 9-year return on investment, and I paid that in advance, knowing I wouldn't have to pay that again, I absolutely would have done it. That would have been an investment for myself. Now, if I expand on that and I'm driving more, I'm going to pay for that excess use of fuel that I will be purchasing above and beyond what I had agreed to. That's a lot of like what the solar systems are. You're essentially sizing a system to produce what you are using, knowing that if your usage or your technology or anything else changes down the road, you will pay additional fees or for any other additional power that you may need. The 200 kilowatt cap is great. It may be a 70% offset for a lot of residential or commercial applications. They're still going to be paying the extra fees and stuff, but at least the part that they're offsetting can now be sold to other people that are using it. We're allowing that power to go further.
Thank you, Mr. Spears. I appreciate your testimony. Do we have any other citizens in the room that want to testify on this? Please, if you would, state your name and give us your testimony.
Chairman Heiner, representatives, my name is Jason Thornock. I'm from Cokeville also, and appreciate the chairman bringing this bill to the committee. Much needed. And my neighbor Tim talked a little bit about what we're experiencing as producers. I'm a farmer, rancher in Cokeville also, and looked at getting this REAP grant when it came out to putting in a system that would produce enough power to offset my consumption in a year. I'm not the biggest farmer in Cokeville, but my power bill is about $150,000 a year. Every year it goes up. Last year, Rocky Mountain Power went to the Public Service Commission to ask for a 30% raise. Thankfully, that was pushed back to about 5%, so they filed a lawsuit to sue and to get that raise back, and this year they applied for another 15%, and they'll be back next year to apply for another 15%. And like Tim said, I haven't called them, but I've thought about calling them and asking them if they'd give me a 15% raise on my calves and my hay to keep up, but we don't have that option. It's an incredible position that these public utilities hold. They're a monopoly, and they wield incredible power. They're a government-sponsored monopoly. It's their way or the highway. There's no middle ground. There's no negotiation. It's take it or leave it. And I know you're probably going to hear from some of their people here in just a minute, so I'd like to take just a few minutes and tell you just some of my experiences with Rocky Mountain Power as a consumer and the power that they hold. So back in 2010, I was what Farm Service Agency called a beginning farmer. I'd just gotten into the business. I bought my first piece of ground, and there was an opportunity there to put a pivot on it and a pump and make something there. And so I called Rocky Mountain Power, told them about what I was planning to do. They came out with their estimator. There was a power line within 300 feet of my property. And they said, we'll deliver power there, but you've got to provide us with all of our easements. I had to go research their easements and provide them to Rocky Mountain Power. They had the easement. They sent me a contract to provide power. I signed the contract, sent the $10,000 back that they were requiring, and they scheduled a date in May of 2010 to deliver this power. And so I bought a pivot and a pump and started farming and invested a lot of money. And around the first part of May, they called me and said, your neighbor's not too excited about us using that easement to put that power across there. We're not going to deliver that power. And like I say, finances were tight. I was new. I couldn't afford a big hiccup. And I said, I need that power. And they said, well, good luck. We're not going to put it there. And so over the next 3 months, I found another route that was 3 times as long to get to my property through another neighbor. And in the meantime, this neighbor that didn't like it over there in the first place, he had sued Rocky Mountain Power to prevent him from ever using that easement. I got this other line built. I built the other line over to where they said they would connect me through my other neighbor. Called them up, said, could you come hook this one up? And they said, we're not going to hook that one up either. You've got to get us out of that lawsuit with your neighbor. And I said, that's not my lawsuit. I didn't file that lawsuit. I can't get you out of that lawsuit. And besides that, we're going to put this power line over there when we get through this anyway, so come hook me up. And they said, we're not going to hook you up. It just so happened that Governor Friedenthal was in Kemmer that night talking about the Gateway West project. And so I drove over there, stood up in that meeting and told my story. And Governor Friedenthal said, come talk to me after, we're going to straighten that out. So I did, and I'll be darned if the next day Rocky Mountain Power didn't call and say, we can hook you up out there. But before we do, you're going to sign a new agreement with us. You're going to have to sign a new contract with us to deliver power to that new line. And they had told me that they had never signed the previous agreement. I gave them the money, they cashed the check, but they said, we never signed the contract. So sign this new contract and we'll deliver power there. I didn't have any options. I signed the contract. 6 months, and then I went and told the Public Service Commission my story about what I was going through, and they took a keen interest in it. And one of the, Paul Radakovich, he was the Vice President of Operations for Rocky Mountain Power, was at that meeting. And the chairman of the Public Service Commission looked at Paul and said, we want to know what's going on here. So Paul went back to the office and wrote a letter, or had his attorney write a letter, and said, Mr. Thornock says we had a contract on that first power line, but he signed it, we never signed it, so we didn't have an agreement. So anyway, and they stuck by that story for 6 months.
Mr. Thornock,
Sorry.
I really don't want to cut you off here,
Okay.
but we are really limited on time.
Okay.
And could you smoosh her down really tight here? And I know you're for this bill, and can you condense it here within like a minute or so,
Sure,
please?
yeah, can I have just 2 minutes on this?
Yes, sir,
And I'll get
let's-
through it real fast. Anyway, that fall in depositions, they pulled out the original contract. They had signed it when they, in March, and they had lied about it to the Public Service Commission and me for 6 months. I thought that was fraud. I was still young and naive. I thought that was fraud. I sued them. Anyway, this went on for 5 years. I lost in court because I had signed that second contract, which relieved them of anything under the first contract. So then I had the privilege of paying them $70,000 for their attorney's fees too, because I lost. But anyway, the reason I share that story is because you're going to hear a lot of sob stories about how this net metering is going to affect the utilities. I'm telling you, that if you went to them with a sad story saying, I need power, I'm a beginning farmer, we've got a contract, I need power, this will break me, they couldn't care less. And I understand that they provide our power and we've got to take care of them, but they are killing the small producers in this state. Net metering gives us an opportunity to at least level that playing field. We're dealing with monopolies, and they can break us. If their costs go up, they go to the Public Service Commission and they get an increase in their rates. We don't have that option, and it's getting away from us. I also applied for that REAP grant. I had it approved, but this 25 kilowatt peak max makes it so it's not feasible. You asked about making money with the project. At 1.9 cents for a kilowatt of power doesn't work even with a big grant. But my project was going to be a $2 million project with the grant and some of the tax credits, which we may or may not agree with all the grants, and I'm with you on that, but it would have offset my power bill and, like was just mentioned, set my rate for the next 20 years.
Mr. Thornock, thank you very much. I wish we had more time.
Sure,
I really
thank you.
do, and I appreciate your testimony. Are there any other citizens in the room that would like to testify on this? Okay, are there any professionals that would like to testify on this? Please work your way to the front and please proceed and introduce yourself and whip it on us.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Monica Leininger, speaking on behalf of the Nature Conservancy in Wyoming. I've never been referred to as a professional talker, but I found that to be quite funny. And so thank you very much for the opportunity. I think you've probably heard from constituents about the many benefits of this bill, including more Main Street businesses, jobs, and greater energy freedom and ownership. But one perspective of this bill that we really support is that it reduces the need for impact on our landscapes for utility scale build out of renewable energy. We know in Wyoming that our land is our life and livelihood, and so we appreciate that this bill does not contribute to those issues and furthermore works to help to solve the issue. I also wanted to point out a study that I was looking at last night. It's from 2021 from a grid modeling expert that showed if 10% of our grid was made up of these distributed renewable energy projects, then that would save ratepayers nearly $1 trillion. If those projects hadn't existed, then we wouldn't see those savings. And that comes from reduced needs for investment and leveraging of private capital on the utility side, reduced costs from transmission, and reduce energy losses, moving power from power plants to the end consumer. So I just wanted to say I support this bill. We also support the meter aggregation aspects of the bill, as that would help agricultural producers and help keep ag on the land. Thank you very much, and I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, committee. We need to keep her tight, so I appreciate your testimony.
Thank
Yes,
you.
sir. You're up and at it.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is John Burrows, and I'm here representing the Wyoming Outdoor Council. We're the oldest independent conservation group in Wyoming, and our mission is to protect Wyoming's environment and quality of life for now and future generations. We represent thousands of members statewide. We stand in support of this bill and appreciate the sponsors and the chairman for bringing it forward. At its core, we think this bill will help promote energy freedom and empower Wyomingites to generate more of their own electricity. It's no secret that our electricity rates are going up, as we've heard, in some cases 10, 15, 20% just in the last few years alone. This bill expands one of the few tools Wyomingites have to directly influence those bills by producing electricity to meet their needs on net metered systems that they pay for and they own. As you all know, Wyoming law caps net metering at 25 kW, or 25 kilowatts, which is roughly the size needed to serve a large residential home. It's also silent on this topic of meter aggregation. One of the things we really appreciate about this bill is that it actually pulls us into parity with what other states around us are doing regarding net metering. And I'll give two examples. The Utah one has already been brought up. But in Oregon, the cap for net metered systems is actually 2 megawatts for non-residential customers served by PacifiCorp, and meter aggregation is allowed. In North Dakota, it's a little bit less, but the net metering cap is 100 kilowatts, and that's for both residential and commercial customers of investor-owned utilities. And then a number of other states, like West Virginia, have a cap system that differs between customer types so that customers can generate electricity better to match those needs. And this is really important because a lot of utility customers, like local governments, school districts, and agricultural producers, like you heard today, would benefit from net metered systems that are larger than that 25 kW cap. And then another aspect of this bill that we really like is that how it would positively impact non-residential customers like local governments and schools. We think it's important to mention that when these entities generate more of their own electricity, they're actually saving taxpayer dollars that would otherwise be going to pay utility bills. These saved dollars are going to plow streets, they're going to fill potholes, and they're going to improve community service in Wyoming communities. So I just conclude by saying this: when tomatoes at the store get expensive, we grow our own. When electricity gets more expensive, Wyomingites should be able to generate more of their own electricity. This bill puts savings back into the pockets of residents and communities who are already living on the margins, and we urge you to listen to what Wyoming people are saying on this issue and vote yes on this bill. So thank you for your time, and I'm happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Burrows. We're gonna go ahead and keep moving forward. Next.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Era Arano, Rocky Mountain Farmers Union. We are a general ag organization, and all of our policy positions are decided by our members, and we support net metering for all of the reasons that you've heard, and out of respect for your time, I will leave it at that and stand for questions.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. We're gonna keep moving forward. Unless there's someone that's just dying for something, but who wants to go? Please state your name and begin.
Of course. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee members. I'll keep this short. My name is Natalie Johansson. I represent Powder River Basin Resource Council, an organization that has advocated for responsible resource development and for rural communities in Wyoming for over 50 years. I am here for our 1,500 members, who include ranchers, business owners, and townspeople throughout Wyoming. This bill will benefit our members, and I urge you to vote yes on House Bill 183. This bill represents a crucial step forward in empowering Wyoming's rural communities and landowners to take control of their energy future, enhancing their energy freedom and independence. This legislation offers practical solutions that benefit our entire state, from family ranches to small businesses, and from rural communities to growing towns. I'll skip over what has already been said, but we appreciate the aggregation and the increased cap. I urge you to vote yes on House Bill 183, as it represents practical, forward-thinking approach for energy independence and benefits all of Wyoming. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for your testimony. Mr. Schwartz, would you?
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. Andy Schwartz, representing the town of Jackson. I'll be real quick, but when I was the chair of the county commission 20 years ago, the county, the town, and our provider entered a tripartite agreement because our co-op provides us very cheap electricity, largely based on hydro. And the concern was that increasing demand was going to force them to get alternative suppliers, which would raise the rates significantly. We have been very active in using solar to keep the costs of electricity for the entire community down. So that's governmental, it's homes, and it works. And this net metering bill will help us continue to do that. So we are in support of the bill, and I stand for any questions.
Mr. Schwartz, thank you so much. Is there anyone else in the room that would like to testify on this? And if you could, please keep it extremely short, like I like it or I don't. Just kidding.
Thank
Please
you.
state your name and.
My name is Bruce Acey. I'm here on behalf of Montana Dakota Utilities Company. We provide not only electric service, but we provide gas service in the northern part of the state. And I appreciate Chairman Heiner, the bill, and your explanation for it, as well as those who have spoken in support of it, because they made some good points with respect to concerns they have. The one thing I would mention and try to highlight is that as a utility, and we get attacked for bills such as net metering, but the fact is we have a responsibility to serve all of our customers, and we are required to go to the Public Service Commission to have our rates approved. And when they approve a rate, they have to look at the public interest, which means they look at all customers to make sure that all of the customers are taken care of. The concern we have with this bill relates primarily to the concept of cross-subsidization, and that is that those who may not be able to afford a solar collector or a hydro system or a wind system, they might not be able to afford it. They would not benefit from the benefits that you've heard today that have been addressed. Because of that, we have to address all of the interest of all customers. I sent you an email and suggested that you might consider an amendment to this bill if you wanted to look at it. I think it makes it a little more palatable for all. We have kind of a battle looming. When you have SF 111, it's going to come back and you're going to see that. Seems like they're a little bit at loggerheads, but we can address that. And what I'm suggesting in my amendment, and I provided to you and I have copies, it goes exactly to what Chairman Heiner indicated, and that is with respect to the true-up, the bill as it is presently addressed, and that's 16103, it provides, just as you indicated, that there's going to be a true-up unit using avoided cost. And what I'm suggesting in my proposed amendment is that it defines avoided cost a little more, so that there's guidance to the Public Service Commission so that they really do, in setting that avoided cost rate, have some guidance so that it's fair to all concerned. And we recognize the fervor in which many come, and I know I'm going late, and I apologize for that. But since I'm kind of lonely on my position, please accommodate me for just 2 seconds more.
Please,
And
no.
that is,
You're the only one that has had this type of a position, so please continue.
thank you. So all I'm saying is that we encourage an amendment that defines avoided cost a little more so that it gives direction to the PSC that when they're defining what avoided cost is, they have the benefit of a little more direction from the legislature with respect to how they can address the needs of all. And that's what I'm suggesting too. I do have copies for you if you'd like to see it, but I did provide it to you by email a few days ago.
Okay.
Thank you for your courtesy. in
Yeah,
allowing
no,
me at
thank
this
you for your
late time.
testimony. Appreciate it. Is there anyone else in the room that would like to tackle it? Come on up. Gentlemen, I'm gonna ask that you please keep it short, like minute and a half, 2 minutes, if you can. Introduce yourself and start.
Mr. Vice Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Chris Petrie with the Wyoming Public Service Commission. I'm the deputy chairman there. I'm going to start with something really easy and perhaps would have some attraction. We have in our general supervision of public utilities an annual report that all the utilities file. This year, we have required them to file all the essential information about net metering activity on their systems, and that's going to be coming in. So in the last part of this statute, where it lays out the requirements for reporting and sets a 5% threshold, I'd say that you could reduce that so that it just says when annual total capacity of the net metering systems in Wyoming reaches 5%, well, you could just have us report it on an ongoing basis, but if you want 5%, we could do that too. We're gonna have that information, and we could very easily, from what we're going to gather, report the net metering capacity for each public utility relative to each utility system capacity, so that you'd have that number and you'd have it as it trends, and it's trending up. It's not anything dramatic or drastic, but there's an opportunity there to lose a few words perhaps. And now, to my main remarks on this, the Public Service Commission doesn't have any reason to oppose or support net metering restrictions or expansions or really anything. The only thing that we care about in this realm is that we have safety and that we have just and reasonable rates. I think the safety is covered by the existing other provisions of the act. You can't hook it up. If it's too big, it won't work, or, there may be costs, then I think that's all addressed. But we have had a long conversation on this topic about subsidization. And the idea is that when a customer offsets a unit of consumption, a kilowatt hour, they pay a volumetric rate for that. For each kilowatt hour, there's a charge. Customers also pay a monthly charge, and it depends on the type of customer you are. Some of these
Mr. Petrie, not to cut you off, but I think that might be a different bill. And I understand where you're going with this.
Okay.
But this bill, I don't think addresses that issue. I could be wrong, but I can.
It does not, and Vice Chairman, perhaps I'm going out of bounds here. I would just say that there is potentially an easy solution for that, for this expanded size maximum.
Okay.
Which would be to look at Wyoming Statute Section 3716-101A Romanet 8B2 and insert an exception.
I might not have got that. You got it? Okay, thank you.
Do you want it again?
No, Chairman is watching out for me, so thank you.
101A 8B2. If you were to include an exception to that, basically, it's a prohibition against certain rate-making approaches that might be used to guard against any subsidies. And I don't know for certain whether there's any subsidy that would apply to this size of these rate classes, and the utilities have all different arrangements in their rate classes. They have similarities, but they're all unique. And if you accepted these new, bigger systems from that restriction on what can be done in rates, that would create a tool and additional flexibility to make sure that along with the increased size, you didn't create an increased subsidization problem. I'll just hit on one quick thing. The avoided cost rates, which to me are a distant second in the importance of issues here. Those range from 2 to 4% across the utilities in the state. And Rocky Mountain Power, Chairman, I'm sorry that this wasn't told to you apparently, and it might not be out there in the public much yet unless you knew just where to work. But those avoided cost rates for Rocky Mountain Power did increase just about a penny recently, a little more than a penny. So they're still in that same ballpark.
Mr. Petrie, thank you so much for your testimony and enlightenment. Mr. Taylor, I'm really sorry, but we got to be quick.
Mr. Chairman, Sean Taylor, Executive Director of the Wyoming Rural Electric Association. We are not Rocky Mountain Power. Harken back to the Co-op 101 I gave you at the beginning of the week. We are owned by our members. We are not for profit. We're not in this for the profit. We work with our members, and we would like to work with the committee and the chairman. We do have a couple of concerns that we can address as this bill moves forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. You know, I'm a rancher also, so I understand not for profit, so thank you. Committee, what would you like to do with this bill? Moved by Representative Smith and seconded by Representative Lawley. Would we like to discuss the bill? Seeing that we don't want to discuss it, question being called on House Bill 183.
Representative Campbell.
Excused.
Representative Knapp.
Aye.
Representative Larson.
Aye.
Representative Lawley.
Aye.
Representative Riggins.
Excused.
Representative Schmidt.
Absolutely, aye.
Representative Tarver.
Aye.
Representative Weber.
Aye.
Chairman Heiner.
Aye.
7-4 with 2 excused. This passes.
Thank you. So House Bill 183 will go to the floor. Thank you, everyone, for your participation. I'm sorry we ran out of time. We will meet again on Monday morning. We only have 3 more meetings before crossover. So meeting's adjourned.